Welcome, everybody, and good afternoon. Welcome to the third session of the International Leadership Conference. The title of the session is Climate Action, Bridging Policy and Practice. Today, we have quite an international panel, each working in the area of the environment. And I'm really excited about all the different points and perspectives that are going to come across today. I think we're all going to learn a lot from this session. We're talking about the intersection between practices that are working and new innovations in the field of taking care of the environment, and how that can be put into practice through policies and forward-moving direction from all of our leaders. We have 4 panelists today, and each one will share about 7 to 10 minutes about their area of specialty, and then we'll bring up our panel to discuss together. Our first speaker today is Ms. Marianne Therese Amores Dutta. She is an architect, entrepreneur, permaculture designer, and founder of the Regenesis Project, which is a growing movement that aspires to lead large-scale efforts to heal and regenerate degraded ecosystems in the Philippines. 2 years after topping the architecture licensure examination in 2011, she began working in the Built Environment Research and Innovation Institute in the Building Construction Authority in Singapore, where she led the development of industry standards, frameworks, and training programs to drive digitalization across Singapore's built environment sector. Then in 2016, she received her master's degree in integrated sustainable design from the National University of Singapore to pursue her true passion, sustainability, and the environment. Since then, she has been formulating a framework for what a regenerative model of development might look like and how it can be done, which led to the start of what is now her passion project and her life mission, Regenesis. So welcome, Marianne. We're very excited to hear from you. The floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Kaeleigh, and thanks so much for this invitation and this opportunity to speak. Let me just call out my screen. All right, I hope you can see my screen. I'm on my first slide. So yeah, the Regenesis project is basically the first ecosystem restoration camp in the Philippines and the third in Asia. So ecosystem restoration camps are a global movement of camps around the world that are working towards restoring degraded landscapes within their respective contexts. So there are only 50 camps. So in a way, they are serving as living laboratories of the best practices on how to restore degraded ecosystems within different biomes and within different contexts. So our particular camp, we have our mission, which is healing nature through people and healing people through nature, because we believe that healing of people and healing of communities and nature should be a bi-directional thing, and it's not just people coming together and then planting trees and then leaving it at that. So every single camping activity has an aspect of ecosystem restoration depending on what the season is and what we need to do. And we also bring in aspects of like healing or spirituality or coming back to oneself, meditation, and all of those mindfulness practices. That is the easiest thing to explain, and that is the first thing that people usually think of and see when they think of the Regenesis Project. But at a much, much deeper level, what we hope to do is to really transform human systems to become regenerative. So that means agriculture, tourism, the way we do industries, design development, and also education. So when we reviewed the latest IPCC reports, we were happy to see that what we were doing is aligned with the new emphasis and the new thinking in which climate, human systems or human society, and natural systems or ecosystems are very, very much interlinked. It's not as if like human systems affect climate, but all these 3 things affect each other. And so we will have to work around these interdependencies to see how we could move forward into the future. So where do we come in? All these 3 things and its interrelationships has always been what we believed in since the inception of the Regenesis Project. And how we tackle it, first and foremost, we focus on restoring the human-nature relationship first. I have always believed that I have always believed in solving problems indirectly, because when you solve problems indirectly, you are more likely to address the root cause of the issue, root cause of the problem, and look at it from a more holistic perspective as opposed to just solving symptoms of the problem. So we really believe that climate change are mere symptoms of underlying brokenness and underlying brokenness of systems and broken human nature relationships and even human to human relationships. So if we focus on repairing or restoring the human and ecosystem relationship first, we feel that two things can happen. First is that we will slowly build like an army or a legion of change makers and restorers who will help restore our ecosystems or natural systems at a larger scale to help it become more climate resilient. And then, secondly, when it comes to repairing or transitioning human systems to be something that is more climate resilient, also, it will be coming more from the perspective of nature. It's not as if it's something that is more human based or siloed or just focusing on emissions and things like that. So, we focus on establishing a proper foundation first, which is what we think is human and natural ecosystem relationship. So that is why in all of our camps, ever since we started June of last year, this has been our emphasis. And we believe that restoring human nature relationships could come in many forms. It could come through experiences, camping experiences, getting people directly involved in the restoration process. We also believe that it could come through that sense of community or that sense of a higher purpose, that you are part of a larger mission as opposed to just simply joining in something that is for fun, or you're coming it's like tourism and then you come enjoy the place and then that's it, you leave with memories, but you feel as if you're part of something bigger than yourself. We also feel that we want to really move more towards deeper aspects of humanity, and then repairing things that are more broken inside, and even addressing mental health issues. This is also because we felt that our campers or the people who have visited us, they seem to keep coming back for different reasons. Some for the experience, some for the uniqueness of the activities of what we do, but also many come for that sense of mental health relief, getting away from the stress or of day-to-day life or the pandemic or things like that. So these deeper aspects of healing is what we hope to move forward to into the future. And then another aspect that we would really want to dive deeper into is education, because we feel that the way we think about the world and our position, humans, our human, the position of humans in nature was also what brought about this problem in the first place. So if moving forward towards a different future, we will have to change the way we think. We will have to change our worldviews and how we see ourselves in all of these systems, so that we can think as nature, uh, as part of a nature. So that is why we have also looked into, training, developing permaculture courses. So permaculture is actually a regenerative form of agriculture. It means permanent culture, also means permanent agriculture. So we have also been partnering with the Women's Federation with World Peace to teach permaculture or permanent agriculture, which are more sustainable and regenerative models of living to the youth here in Bohol in the Philippines. And we hope to expand this into other forms of curriculum as well, so that what we do from here on is more aligned with nature's way of thinking and nature's way of doing this. Yeah. And then once we have established this very crucial foundation of restoring human land relationship, then we could move towards helping our ecosystems or natural systems become more climate resilient. Just December of last year, we have faced the onslaught of the worst hurricane that we have experienced in living history. It was a Category 5 level hurricane that literally devastated our whole island and all neighboring islands. The devastation and destruction was absolute. Up until this point, electricity are still not restored in some areas of the province, but it was also a huge shock to everyone because no one was expecting it, no one was prepared for it. But it also made us realize that moving forward into the future, we have to quickly adapt with what is to come. So when we move forward into the future, when we build, when we restore, we can't just do it based on what we are experiencing now, but what we will face in the future with climate change. So in our specific context, what we will be facing isn't necessarily anything new. It'll just be much more intense, and much more frequent. So droughts, floods, typhoons, hurricanes, and all of that. The worst things that we will probably be facing have to do with water, flooding, droughts, and all of those things. So ever since the beginning, we really believe in investing in restoring and managing our watersheds first. Water is the number one investment that we would want to make now and into the future, especially in the realm of climate change. So the earthworks that we have introduced in our site has to do with water. And moving forward, we will also be introducing more strategies to recharge, hold, and spread as much water as we can in as high of the watershed as possible. So that number one, we hope to mitigate floods in the downstream areas of the watershed. And number two, we could recharge and rehydrate our landscapes so that we could survive in an event of El Nino or in an event of droughts, which we will also be experiencing in the future. Another thing that we have to consider is what we plant. And it's also a shock. It's also like a startling realization that we think of trees and ecosystems and forests as being like a source of life, but in our case, it could also be a source of destruction or a source of a loss of life, especially when the trees themselves are destroying homes, destroying life, and even blocking very critical roadways and access roads that prevents help from reaching the furthest and most remote corners of our island. So that actually got us to thinking, how can we restore in a way so that our landscapes will be resilient against these kind of threats and these kind of destructions in the future, not just in terms of wind or water, but also in terms of rising temperatures. Are there certain species? Are there certain protocols in how we plant that could actually result to more resilient landscapes? So all of these things we are already starting to consider. We are in the midst of carrying out like a smaller research project to figure out their relationships between all of these different planting factors and resilience, especially when it comes to typhoons. So it could be biotic factors, it could be site factors, it could be like the different nature of the damages, which we are still monitoring up until this point. And then our hope is to build a living database so that we will quickly learn with every disaster. I know it sounds very morbid or it sounds very sad, but we will just quickly adapt to what we have to face now and in the future. Um, Previously, we had evolution or time as our ally. Um, what will survive is what will continue to evolve in the future. But now, climate change is happening so fast that we have to treat every disaster and every hazard as an opportunity to quickly learn and to quickly build up new databases of what to restore, how to restore, and then refine from there so that we could evolve with a changing climate. Another very critical aspect of what we're doing is ecosystem monitoring, depending on different strategies of what we are restoring on our site. Because number one, we want to see if there are difference in performance between how we plant, what we plant, depending on the different restoration strategies from food forests, rice production, bamboo forestry, natural wild forestry and all of those things. We want to see how they will fare, and how they will fare with regards to specific ecological indicators in soil, water, biodiversity, and all of that, and see how that will change in the upcoming years, so that we could learn as we go along. And then finally, the last piece of the puzzle is really transforming all human systems. So when we say all human systems, it literally means all, because all of our industries, all of our systems that we are currently, that have been running for the past hundreds of years, have a direct or indirect impact to climate change and to the environment. So the way we grow our food, agriculture has to change from extractive practices to more regenerative practices. So from extracting and depleting nutrients from the soil to building up soil. So that is why we have been teaching permaculture, because permaculture is growing food in a way that actually rebuilds soil, rebuilds fertility into the land. And permaculture, because the principles of permaculture are truly aligned with natural systems, it is also what is informing our design decisions. So I am an architect, and I would probably be the first to say that how we design and how we build has to drastically change in the near future, so that what we build and how we build will be in alignment with larger systems, water systems, energy, site forces, and all of that, so that instead of just focusing on our footprint, on our site plan, we hope to create developments that leave a positive impact within the surrounding community and in the surrounding landscapes. Even the way we do tourism is changing, and we are also influencing the nature of tourism and the future of tourism here in our island and hopefully here in our country. What we're doing now is technically no longer ecotourism. It's not ecotourism anymore, because ecotourism basically assumes that there is already nature and we only need to come and then enjoy it, leave as small a footprint as possible, and then you can just go home. But what we're doing is we're starting with degraded land. There's no nature to begin with, but we're using tourism to help bring nature back to life. We are involving our visitors, our campers, our tourists directly in our restoration process, and we are focusing more on authentic and real experiences, higher value experiences, as opposed to just mass tourism. So hopefully, this will also influence the rest of the tourism sector in our island, because our island is heavily dependent on tourism as one of its highest industries. Not only that, many of our industries will also have to change. So I'm sure many of us have already seen that, like changing towards more sustainable materials in terms of paper, fiber, and whatever. So that's why a lot of industries are looking towards the use of bamboo as an alternative source, fast growing species compared to trees. But the question is, where do we get this huge supply of bamboo planting materials, which we are very obviously going to need now? So if we're going to rush into this, or we're going to quickly plant whatever bamboo we want to plant without considering the implications, the differences in all these various protocols, we might end up with a problem. And that is also what we have seen in the Philippines, especially with regards to the planting protocols and the differences between asexual propagation and sexual propagation. So what we have done in the very beginning was establish a nursery first. We are the largest bamboo nursery, seed-based bamboo nursery in our island, and we are one of the handful or less of bamboo nurseries in the Philippines that are actually focusing on seed-based propagation. We are focusing on seed-based propagation because we have seen the difference in the vigor of the growth, um, and the quality of the planting materials, and how fast it grows, um, uh, if you compare cuttings or sexual propagation versus seed. So moving forward into the future, as we know that our country is heavily invested in bamboo. In our case, we want to do it properly. We want to establish proper protocols so that we could we could lessen undesired impacts into the future. An example of that would be simultaneous flourishing uh, of of many bamboo species, because many bamboo species actually flower and then die after that. So that is actually what we want to avoid, because that means that we will lose an opportunity to sequester carbon and lose out on an opportunity to grow many of our different industries. So we are starting off with high quality mother plants first, that is starting from seed.
Marianne,
Sorry.
this is really fascinating. If you could close it up in the next minute or so, just so we can give everybody a chance to also give their remarks as well. This is really
Yeah,
fascinating. Thank you.
sure. I'm closing. So uh, right now, we hope to trailblaze a regenerative value chain using bamboo from seed to forestry to product, even to building. And then in the future, we hope to tie everything together towards sites that are being restored with metrics that can be tracked, um, so that the materials or the products that you buy could be traced back to actual ecosystems that could be restored, as kind of like an integrated monitoring system. So that is what we're doing and we hope to do in the future. So I guess in closing, um, what we're hoping to do is to go beyond just striving for slightly better, but to imagine the highest ideal possible and to just take the first step in that direction and see if that hopefully transforms certain industries. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Marianne. I learned so much from this presentation. And what I appreciate the most is this idea of looking at the relationship and the understanding and the education of human beings and nature, not looking them as separate pieces of an equation, but as an integrated, interconnected process. I learned a lot about permaculture, which I had to do some research on before I invited you. So thank you so much. And I really appreciate that you're modeling the way in your own community and showing how to do this and not just talking about it. So it's really fascinating. Thank you so much for your work. We're going to welcome our next speaker who comes to us from Spain today. So again, very international panel. Looked like it was the middle of the night for Marianne. Heard some roosters in the background, right? So our next speaker is Mr. Fernando Morales. He is from the University of Granada in the Forest Ecosystem Restoration area. He's also a World Economic Forum top innovator. He's a young climate activist and environmentalist scientist at the University of Granada. He specializes in forest landscape restoration and governance, leading nature restoration projects in southern Spain and helping communities transform desertified lands into healthy and biodiverse landscapes. He's been awarded as a top innovator by Uplink, 1 Trillion Trees, and the World Economic Forum for his project Kabula Initiative. In addition, Fernando has actively participated in high-level climate discussions, and he's also conducted green entrepreneurship programs at Babson College in the US, Impact Hub Italy, and Creative Cities in Belgium in order to strengthen his entrepreneurial skills for environmental impact. As a strong believer in the power of positive thinking, he envisions a world where intergenerational justice and nature are part of the solution for climate recovery. So Fernando, we're super excited to have you. I'm glad that our paths crossed, and I look forward to hearing your presentation today.
Okay, thank you so much for having me here. And it's a pleasure to be here with all of you talking about climate action, policy, and implementation, because I think it's a key topic. I remember where the first time I attended the COP, it was COP24 in Poland. And I remember there how they were basically displays. They were just bringing together all the different sectors, the leaders of the sectors, and trying to make them confluence their interest and make a final decision, just to negotiate and make politics, right? So I remember this conflict of interest and how difficult it was to finally deliver something like concrete. But it's not, it doesn't end there. So I think that the real challenge is actually implement all those policies. And so there's the whole system from policy to implementation. There's a wide spectrum of challenges, right? And as Marianne said, I think like it's even more difficult when I think we need to transcend from sustainability towards regeneration, right? So with all that in mind, when I came back to my home in Granada, southern Spain, so I realized like in the last few years, very rapidly, we are seeing how our landscape is changing. So basically, because of the Sahara Desert influence, we are seeing how the green of the facility, we are losing it and changing it for the brown of the desert. We are losing the biodiversity that is basically our best ally against climate change, right? So because of that, I started to mobilize the local community, engage them to basically recover the landscape in which we live in and restore also their relationship with the place, with nature. So we started this movement called a Kaeleigh initiative that it's basically an attempt to bring back all the biodiversity and put the people on the center of this recovery. So it's like an umbrella concept in which we have 9 different projects that all oriented towards the same direction, that is landscape regeneration. And how did we do it? So we basically signed like a pact for restoration. So we gather all the different sectors, like university with their innovation and trainings, also the private companies with their, their muscle and their financial efforts, also the public administration, because we need them, their political willing and their leadership. And finally, a key element is like the local community, because they are going to be the last beneficiaries of the restoration, and they need to feel identified with the whole process. So we basically embrace all these sectors and all of these stakeholders into the process with this pact for restoration, in the design, the implementation, and the monitoring phases of the landscape restoration. So what we saw at the end basically is a recovery process in which not just nature came back. We are seeing how we have seen species that we thought it were lost, but they are coming back from Africa. So migrant birds and different insects that are coming back. But we have also seen how the people are again interested in which plants they depend on in the past for their traditional uses. So they link the cultural values to the landscape and to the species that we are using for landscape restoration. So at the end, it's like a regeneration, a regenerative history, but not just for nature, but also for the human well-being and the necessary link with the nature and with the place they live in. So at the end, I think we humans, basically, we have 2 options to learn. One is by shock, and the other is by proactivity. No, and I think that we need to be more proactive. And that means to create new, and for that, I think that innovation is essential. Innovation is just this ability that we humans have to make visible the new ways of living and to show the rest of the people that it's possible, and the climate action has sense, and we need it to happen urgently, right? So I think that for the lessons from the COP to the implementation of the projects are very wide, but I think that it's everything pretty much about the conviction that we need to take action, everyone for their step up from their levels, and in the end, I like to think about this parable that talks about that we have 2 wolves inside each of us. So one wolf is the dark from the despair, and the other wolf talks about light and hope. So which wolf wins at the end? So the one we feed. So thank you so much. That's everything I wanted to share with you.
Thank you so much, Fernando. I think, for those who don't know, COP that he's referring to is part of the UN. It's the Conference of Parties, and you participated in that, right, Fernando? And what you're sharing about is how to, these are great ideas and great decisions that are being made and how they transfer into real life. One of the things I appreciated when we spoke on the phone earlier, and you reiterated this point also, is that in your work, you're trying to bring together all the different people and groups that impact this area of climate and action and the environment. And it shouldn't just be limited to one group of people who are trying to make this change and this shift, but how do you bridge all those different gaps together to work together and find common solutions? So it's really fantastic work, and really grateful to have you here and share your wisdom with us. One of our panelists is having a little bit of internet difficulty. He was coming in from Ghana, so we're going to try to get him in a little bit. We're going to move on to our fourth panelist today, who is Mr. Chris Barnard, and he is the National Policy Director of American Conservation Coalition. He's actually half American and half Belgian, and he first grew up in Europe, and when he was living in England, he founded the UK version of the American Conservation Coalition, which was called the British Conservation Alliance. And this grew quickly to become the largest environmental campus network in the country. During his time there, he spoke at many events and conferences and traveled to many countries, and he wrote regularly for the Daily Telegraph, CapEx, Washington Examiner. He also co-published the book Green Market Revolution, which with a host of innovative environmental pro-market thinkers and scholars, which has now been read in 91 countries around the world. He achieved this alongside completing a master's degree in international relations at the London School of Economics. So Chris, you're in good company in being such a traveler and a knower of the world. We're really excited to have you with us, and I really respect the work that your organization has been trying to achieve. So please share with us today.
Yeah, well, thank you. I've really enjoyed hearing from my fellow panelists, and wherever you are in the world. I'm in DC, so I'm going to say good afternoon, and thank you for tuning in. My name is Chris Barnard. As Kaeleigh mentioned, I'm the policy director for the American Conservation Coalition. And this session is called Climate Action, Bridging Policy and Practice. And the interesting thing from my perspective is that for a very long time, pretty much as long as I've been alive, I'm 23, the conversation around climate change and around environmental issues has pretty much been dominated by one side of the political aisle. There's only been really one side that has taken this issue as something they cared about, that they were trying to introduce policy on, that they're really trying to make a core part of who they are. And we all know what side of the political aisle that is. The interesting thing from my perspective, and this might be shocking to hear for people in this space, but I'm a young conservative. And I'm a young conservative who cares deeply about our planet, about climate change. And I'm also a young conservative who works in climate policy. And I work on trying to find solutions and building bridges when it comes to tackling this problem that we all here in this call on this platform care about. And the reality is I'm not alone. Over 3/4 of young conservatives say that climate change is important to them, both personally and because it's something they care about, but also to their vote. And interestingly, before this kind of last decade and a half of inaction on the conservative or center-right side of the political aisle, there's actually a very strong legacy of leadership from conservatives on this issue. For example, in America, the country where I live and work, the kind of modern conservation movement was founded by President Theodore Roosevelt at the beginning of the 20th century. He kind of was the forefather of our national park system, and he conserved millions and millions of acres of public land in the U.S. because he cared so much about the world that we inhabited, the beautiful nature that he traveled to and hiked in and hunted in. You look at Richard Nixon, who founded the Environmental Protection Agency when he was president. Or you look at Ronald Reagan, who signed the Montreal Protocol. And the interesting thing that I get out of those anecdotes is that, to me, there's nothing more conservative than conserving the world that we live in and making sure that we protect the environment and pass it on to the next generation in a quality and a state better than what we found it in. And so really, to me, that is one of the most conservative principles you can imagine. And so as a young person who cares about this issue. It's been incredibly frustrating for, again, as long as I've been alive, not seeing any leadership on this from my side of the aisle. And so this is really where the American Conservation Coalition comes in, and why we were founded. We were founded back in 2017, really with the mission of giving young conservatives a voice on environmental issues and bridging that gap to bring them to the conversation, to show we care as well. We want to find solutions with you, and we don't want this to be a blue team versus red team kind of partisan food fight. We want this to be about real solutions that bring both sides of the aisle together and that try to really move the ball forward on this. And so in the 5 years since we were founded, we've established branches across the country. We have nearly 10,000 members across the US. We do awesome things on the grassroots, like planting trees or doing trash cleanups or touring clean energy facilities to show, to put spotlight these important solutions around the country and the communities that are implementing these solutions. But what we also do is, in terms of the politics, we try to engage Republicans on this issue, and we try to get them to be a part of the solution in Congress rather than a part of the problem. And so in the last few years, we've actually seen some incredible bipartisan leadership on this issue. At the end of 2020, we helped pass the Energy Act, which brought together Republicans and Democrats to really put the biggest investment in climate technology that we've ever seen in this country. And that happened on a bipartisan basis. Just last year, the Conservative Climate Caucus was launched in the House of Representatives, which includes nearly 90 Republican members of Congress. And the first line on the kind of statement document for the caucus is, climate change is real and humans are having an impact. And so we really see how young people through ACC and around the country are actually pushing conservatives to be better on this issue and to be a part of the solution and to come to the table with solutions and policies that can help push the ball forward on this. Just a few months ago as well, you mentioned COP, the Conference of the Parties UN Climate Summit, which was held in Glasgow this past year. We went there and we actually organized the first ever global conservative climate summit, where we brought together international conservative politicians from around the world, some of the top people that work on these issues in their countries, and we brought them together to talk about this issue and to talk about how we can find solutions that work. We had the former Prime Minister of the UK, Theresa May. She gave a keynote. We had the current Prime Minister of the UK, Boris Johnson, because this was in the UK. He sent in a video message for it. And so what we're really seeing is that young conservatives, in the way that young climate activists have pushed, in many ways, more left-leaning politicians on this issue, this is happening on the right as well. And young conservatives like myself and organizations like ACC are really trying to work on that. Just a few months ago, we also launched some polling, which really shows where young conservative Americans are at when it comes to this issue. And overwhelmingly, you see that they want a different, better alternative to what we're seeing right now. They don't want radicalism on one side and climate denialism on the other. They want a balanced approach that balances economic growth with environmental protection. And a vast majority of young conservatives are more likely to vote for a political candidate if they prioritize climate change than if they do not. And so we're really seeing this shift of young conservatives pushing the Republican Party in the right direction and try to create real bipartisan solutions to this problem. So the final thing I'll say, and why I'm so excited for opportunities to talk like this, is because, as I mentioned, the topic of this conversation is bridging policy and practice. And really, I'm here to help build bridges, to say that this is an issue that we need everyone on both sides of the aisle to be a part of, to come to the table with solutions so that we can build bridges, we can pass durable legislation, and we can really unite people around this issue rather than divide us further. And so that's why I'm so excited to be here. That's the work that I do here in Washington, D.C. I'm excited for the panel discussion as well.
Wow, fantastic. Thank you so much, Chris. You guys have achieved so much. And yeah, I'm curious to get into the discussion about what you think about the working bipartisan in this way and how difficult it has been and what the common solutions have been. It's pretty exciting to, see the legislation you've been able to push forward and the influence that you've been making. So thank you so much for your incredible work and treating this as a we're all in this together kind of forward-moving project. So thank you so much. We're going to bring up our other two panelists because I think we weren't able to reach our final panelist. If someone can jump in if that is incorrect. But interestingly enough, this became a little bit of a younger panel. So I'm actually going to start with a question I actually don't know about in Spain and the Philippines, and I'd love to hear from Fernando and Marianne, but I know where Chris and I are from in the United States, this issue of climate action is very divided, and it can be a very difficult topic. People are kind of triggered in a certain direction because there's certain concepts and connotations that come up with this topic. And so I'm curious in general from Fernando and Marianne about the perceptions of this topic in your countries and the people that you work with. Maybe Fernando, can we start with you? Oh, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I
There
think
you go.
now you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, so I was saying that unfortunately I have to say that it's very divided here in Spain. So it should be a matter of a transversal fact, because whether right or left, we all depend on this climate stability and nature in general. So we are seeing actually recently there's been like a huge polemic related to the meat consumption. So we can see how the different parties are fighting because of that fact, and that fact relies on numbers and figures. So at the end, it's not, from my opinion, it's not a way of making politics. So for me, politics is the fact that we whole as a society, we get organized and we coordinate between each other, and at the end, we result in something, right? Something that is beneficial for everyone, and nature is the most evident benefit for everyone.
Right. Yeah, very good point. Marianne, how about you? What's the situation in the Philippines like?
With regards to climate change, I think we're all on the same side. There isn't any like political related issues that I'm aware of. Maybe because we're too busy trying to survive it. So we're one of the countries that is really on the receiving brunt of climate change, because we're at the Pacific. So we're at the gateway of all these different kinds of typhoons. We receive 20 typhoons a year. I think the main issue is like moving forward. How can we survive what we are already trying to survive, and then worse in the future? Because all of our sectors will be affected, and we have experienced that firsthand. It's like going back to the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, things that we need to survive: water, energy, shelter, and all of those things. So in our case, it's more about how to quickly transition all of our systems and all of our sectors to be more climate resilient as soon as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a perspective I can say in the United States we take for granted. So I'm appreciative of that point. Chris, let me come to you, and based on your experience, as we've kind of discussed this partisan issue, what have you found to be the right way or the right language to talk about this, where it doesn't sacrifice the market or doesn't sacrifice the economy or things like that? What have you found to be the right way to explain this so both sides can come to the table together?
I think that's a great question, and something that we've really focused a lot on in our work. The polling I mentioned, we polled people on both sides of the aisle, and we asked them, what are the top things that you're worried about when it comes to climate change? And interestingly, the top three things that came back were water pollution, air pollution, and wildlife. And you go like, huh, that's interesting, because none of those are directly linked to what we typically think of as climate change. Like, obviously, when people mention in that poll air and water pollution, they literally mean dirty air and dirty water.
Right.
When they talk about wildlife, they mean about the animals that they love disappearing. And the link to climate change is there, but it's not that evident, because when we talk about climate change, we typically talk about sea level rise and extreme weather and things like that. And what we kind of deduced from that is that people really need to have a connection to their personal lives and their direct experience for it to make sense to them. And so if mothers are concerned about their children growing up in a clean and healthy world, they're going to care about clean air and clean water. If you grow up in a beautiful area in the United States or anywhere else in the world, and you have wildlife that really gives the place where you live its identity and its natural heritage, then you care about that. You don't want to see that disappear. And I think often the climate conversation can be a little bit too abstract for people. We talk about climate models, we talk about emissions, which are invisible, we talk about the science, but those aren't things that directly relate to people's individual lives. And so what we focus on is how can we bring this conversation back down to earth? How can we relate to people in their daily lives? And how can we really just tell them we care about you? This is not about some kind of radical agenda to overthrow the economy. It's about protecting your future, protecting your children's future, and protecting the beautiful spaces that we all love. And I think if you bring it back down to that language, people across the aisle are really open to it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, it makes it much more simple, right? It seems like we kind of overcomplicate the topic with certain words that mean something for somebody and mean something else to somebody else. But I think everyone can agree with the idea of clean water and clean air and the wildlife. Fernando, you were talking about the biodiversity that's decreasing as well. So something I noticed from all of your different presentations and kind of studying the work that you do is we're all involved in some area of education or building partnerships or trying to bring people together. And I would love to just hear from you some stories from that area of, what have been the greatest successes in terms of how I know both Marianne and Chris, you're educating young people in this area, right? And bringing them together and helping them to be active in these different areas. And Fernando, I know you work with many different organizations and you have conferences and things like that. So I'd love to hear from each of you just some of those best practices that you found in educating and starting to build a network of young people or partnerships and organizations. Marianne, let's go to you first. What are some of the best practices you've experienced in education and bringing different groups together?
Yeah. Sorry about the roosters in my background.
I love it. It's great.
Yeah. We have had amazing interactions and engagement with the youth here in Bohol. First of all, the youth here are so amazing. They're so proactive. There are so many different youth groups that are focusing on the environment. And they are so high initiative and they truly care about the environment. So they think the key is moving towards the same direction and do actionable things to move our island and move our nation towards more climate resilience. So when we hosted permaculture seminars with the youth only a few, I think like two weeks ago, I think what has been so encouraging is the openness. And what we wanted to do is not just transform what we teach, but also how we teach, how we think about nature. We have to change our worldviews because it was our worldviews that got us into this dilemma, this problem in the first place. So it was so encouraging to see that through that interaction with the youth, some of the reflections that that we were hearing from them was not only like a difference in how we see the world, but also the sense of responsibility and accountability that they feel that they have towards nature now. And that I feel is so important because this will be the same youth that will be spreading this message and helping different communities transition towards more regenerative practices. So it's really great that we're starting with the youth. So that has been one really, really positive engagement that we've been doing here.
That's fantastic. I really resonate with the idea of shifting our whole worldview because, again, there's so many concepts and things that we were raised with. And it's kind of like you have to start from scratch, right? You have to start over and erase some of those things to really be able to move forward in the right direction. Fernando, how about you? Any great stories in partnership and conferences that you've done trying to build a network?
Well, in my opinion, education should be to give the correct message, to give understanding of the situation. Because when you are thinking about recovering the earth, you will probably think about restoring forest, and restoring forest probably means to planting trees. And in many cases, it's not what you have to do. So you just need to give the people the right idea that restoring is not just about planting a tree and you leave the place and everything is all done in there. And we had like not a successful experience here because we we brought like a very big foundation that basically plant trees. And at the beginning, like people welcome very so much this initiative, but at the end we have seen how sometimes when you plant a tree, there are risks associated with this. You can plant the wrong tree. You can plant a tree where it shouldn't be a tree, and you actually, if you are trying to soak carbon, you are actually delivering it into the atmosphere. And at the end, you can also planting trees. You can push another local initiatives to nowhere, and so you are occupying the place that they were planting in and making education and so on. So that would happen. What happened here, and so at the end we are like making a kind of configuration with this big company and integrating it with local and little initiatives and making also education in the meantime. So at the end we managed to hopefully to make a real forest and educate the people.
Yeah, I mean, that's a real testimony of needing the right people and the right conversations, because even well-meaning intentions can not be so fruitful in the long run. But well-meaning intentioned people who are educated also need the manpower, right, and the resources to support them. So yeah, thank you for what you're doing there, because it's a really good model that I hope can be replicated. And Chris, how about you? I know from your organization that trying to build a network of young conservatives in this area is one of your prime targets. Would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, there's three quick things that I want to address on that. The first one is kind of just what I perceive as a general truth. There's some psychological research that came out of Harvard recently that showed that the more negative your messaging on this issue is, A, more likely people are to say it's not true, that they just reject the problem altogether, and B, the more likely they're not willing to do something about it themselves. And so really at ACC, we've implemented this approach of optimism and saying that, look, this is a real issue, but we can solve together as well through cooperation and building bridges. And kind of optimistic, forward-looking perspective really rallies people in a way that I think kind of some of the negative rhetoric that we've seen before can't really do. So that's kind of like the first principle that we approach this with. The second one is, especially when it comes to young people, they can feel a little bit hopeless. They don't really know, what can I do in this kind of grand scheme of climate change? How do I personally fit into this? And one of the things that we've tried to do is given people direct meaning in their communities. And when I say that, I mean we've given them opportunities to plant trees. We've given them opportunities to help restore an ecosystem by helping a local conservation organization or cleaning up their local beach or their local park. And while yes, in the grand scheme of things, that's relatively small and insignificant, it all adds up and it gives them a real sense of meaning, and it makes them feel like they're actively helping towards the stewardship of our planet. And so I think finding ways for young people to be directly involved, often physically hands-on involved, is a really good way to get people to be passionate, because I think the best way for you to care about the planet and about nature is to be in nature and to enjoy it. And so we really try to emphasize that. The third one is a quick story. In November 2020, I was in Utah with a member of Congress, they're Republican, and we visited the county where he's a member of Congress, and that county is called Carbon County. So you can imagine what kind of industry is there. It's entirely coal reliant, and he took us to kind of the coal facility near there, and we had a chance to talk to the coal miners and kind of their perspectives on the issue. And they said, well, the problem is they feel completely ostracized from this debate. They feel like they're completely left out. They feel villainized. They think that, we're tackling this problem of climate change, and so the coal miners, they're the evil people that we need to get rid of as soon as we can. And to them, it's not so much that they care about coal specifically. It's just, it's been a way of life. It's their economy. It's their culture. It's the jobs that they want to pass on to the next generation. But all their kids are moving out to the big city. They're not able to pass it on. Their industry's struggling. And so they're kind of in a bind. What are they doing? And so the reason this congressman took us to this particular coal facility is because they're working on a carbon capture storage plant there as well to capture the emissions from the coal. And they're also working on some molten salt nuclear reactors. And they do this because they realize that if they want to stay relevant, if they want to pass on an industry to the next generation, if they want to keep their little slice of the world relevant in the grander scheme of things, they need to innovate, they need to do this, and they're willing to do that. And I think often we forget to have conversations with those people. We think in abstract terms. We need to close all the coal plants right now. We need to ban fossil fuels now. But we don't think about the human aspect of that and the faces behind that. And so a lot of what we do is going into those communities that I don't think many other people are going into, talking to them, having conversations, and trying to build bridges and find ways to work together. And that's really, I think, one of the core things that we try to work on.
Yeah, excellent. I mean, really good points all around. We're getting to the end of our session here, and I first of all want to thank the three of you, especially Fernando and Marianne, who I know it's very late for you, and you still made it out and did the whole session with us. But I also just really want to acknowledge, this generation of leadership in this area, which I really feel is all of you spoke to this model of bringing people together. I think that's really the foundation of everything we're talking about, because no one person, no one side, no one group can do this alone. And we do have to take care of our environment. So thank you so much for everything you're doing. I want to let each of you just make a closing comment. If you want to talk about what gives you hope for the future, or any takeaway from this session, we'd love to hear your closing remarks. So maybe, Fernando, we'll start with you. Any closing remarks from you?
Well, for me, I would say like we need to create new pathways. We need to imagine what's possible so that we can take action towards that direction. So innovation for me is crucial. And youth, I think that the youth have this ability to innovate. So let's bring the youth also to the table.
Yes, I think we're all on the same page with that. How about Marianne? Any closing remarks from you?
Yeah, I actually really resonate with what Chris mentioned, focusing on positive messaging. And I really believe that the energies with which we work with affects our work. It also affects the quality of our work. It also affects how people perceive it and like how they would want to be involved. So instead of running away or fighting against something so much, we can all just work excitedly towards something great that hasn't yet been seen, and that's how we see it. We don't see it as a problem. We see it as an opportunity to really transform literally the world through small actions. And I think that if you set a high enough goal and bring all of that excitement, bring all of that energies and passion together, we can really affect change. And that's the kind of climate, the literal social climate that we hope to work in.
Right. Yes. Thank you, Marianne. And Chris, how about you?
I agree with all of that. And I'll also just add, everyone cares about the environment. Like, I'll go as far as saying there's really not a single person out there who doesn't want clean air, clean water, and a beautiful world to look at and to be in.
Right.
And so I think bringing it back to that level, relating to people on a human level, is crucial. Also, to echo what Fernando said, I really do think innovation and technology is crucial to this. And I think that's something that I think is very optimistic, and there's a lot of really cool, awesome innovation coming out of companies around the world. And so I think that's very exciting. The final quick plug I'll add, I guess, is there's plenty of awesome climate organizations to be involved with. But if you're listening to this and you happen to be on the center or the center right, and you want to be involved with a group like that, then you can check us out at acc.eco, which is ECO, and get involved. You can become a member, launch a branch, or whatever it is, but we'd love to have you.
Awesome. No shame in plugs. I'm going to do a plug too, which is for the Earth and I magazine. We have a sister organization of UPF, Universal Peace Federation, which is the International Foundation for the Unity of Sciences. And they put together this online magazine called The Earth and I, and I'll share that with all of you, and we'll put a link in the video description for all of you to be able to check it out in the future. Thank you again to all of our panelists for joining us. This was a fascinating session, a very timely session, and I look forward to continuing to build partnerships with each of you in this great area of taking care of our Earth. Thank you, everybody, and have a good rest of your day.